Welcome back to your home garage, and in this video I'm going to show you how to inspect a used vehicle with this simple checklist. So if you're the average car shopper and uncertain what to even look for or even what to ask, then this video is for you. And when you feel prepared, you'll just know what to look for, and you'll end up asking better questions that may satisfy you to move forward with your buying decision, or just stop and walk away and move on to the next vehicle. So to start, you're going to need a few simple tools, and odds are you already have them lying around the house. To start off with, you're going to need some disposable gloves. And blue is the best color, not black, but blue, because you actually want the residue to show up on the glove. Some paper towel, a dedicated flashlight, and not the light that you would use on your cell phone, an actual dedicated flashlight, because you don't want to drop your phone. And possibly a selfie stick, and I'll show you exactly what you're going to be doing with that later on. So the major components that we're going to be looking at are the body, all the fluids, tires and suspension, and then the startup, test drive, and the post-test drive check. Now before you go and you check out the vehicle, always try to go with another person, because a friend or a family member may be able to pick up on something that you've missed and offer a different perspective. So an extra set of eyes and ears on this important purchase is absolutely key. And always try to check the vehicle in the daytime or with the best light possible. You also want to start your assessment with a cold engine. So if the owner met you in a parking lot, make sure you end up giving the engine enough time to cool down so you can check all the fluids safely, and you give yourself the opportunity to have a cold start. And make sure the vehicle is parked on a level surface. Because you're going to be checking the fluid levels to get an accurate reading, you need to make sure that the vehicle is level. So we're going to start with a visual inspection of the engine bay, and what you're looking for are any obvious leaks. Also loose connectors, any exposed wires, along with any corrosion or rust. Now, if the engine was just detailed, which is nice by the way, it may mask any concerns that you're actually trying to eliminate. So it's always best to circle back to the engine bay to take a look for any signs of leaks after a lengthy test drive. Now let's check the fluids, starting with the engine oil. So just keep in mind that some vehicles need to be at operating temperature to effectively check the oil, but for the majority of the vehicles, this would be accurate enough. So the first thing you're looking for is the proper oil level, and to make sure that that oil is filled right to the top. Also, the color of the oil. The darker the oil, the older the oil actually is, because new oil actually starts off with this golden brown color, as you can see inside this container. So if the oil is really dark, this is a great opportunity to ask about the last oil change and what the regular maintenance actually look like. Now, in most modern day cars, there is an oil life monitoring system, so that's a great way to match what the color should be as well. Also make sure the oil isn't thick, because that would mean that they haven't kept up with their regular maintenance. Or milky, like cream in your coffee, because that would indicate that there's a coolant leak and likely a blown head gasket. And with your fingers, you want to touch the end of the dipstick and actually feel the texture of the oil. If you feel any sort of grit, that would mean that there's a mechanical failure somewhere, and that would be a major issue. Now let's take a look at the oil fill cap. And what we're looking for under the oil fill cap is any buildup or any particles that stuck to the cap. And in this particular case, there's nothing whatsoever, so we're good to go. And with your flashlight, take a look inside and make sure you're not seeing any sort of debris or sludge. So let's put the cap back on, and we'll head on over to the exhaust pipe. So small engines like this one are tuned to actually use more fuel to ensure the engine doesn't overheat. And it's really about thermal control and trying to keep the engine cool by liquid cooling through the fuel. So generally black soot in the exhaust tailpipe would indicate a rich fuel mixture by leaving partially burned exhaust deposits. So not a bad thing in this case because it is expected. However, if the deposit is oily and thick, then that would be a problem, as it likely means the oil is coming through the engine from somewhere. Now let's move to the coolant, and you want to check both if possible, the radiator and the coolant reservoir. Now in the reservoir, you're going to want to see nice clean fluid and no milky residue on the neck of the container. You're also going to want to check the inside of the cap and make sure you're not seeing any milky residue whatsoever. In this particular case, we're not. If we were to see a milky residue, that would mean that the oil is mixing with the coolant. And with your flashlight, you also want to make sure you have the correct coolant level. Now the last thing you want to check on the antifreeze is to make sure it actually has the right color for your make and model of vehicle. A lot of the older vehicles use green antifreeze coolant, but most modern day cars use different additives. So GM, Saab, Volkswagen, you'll find that their antifreeze might be orange. Ford, Chrysler might be yellow. BMW, Volvo, Mini, turquoise. Toyota, Honda, Nissan might be pink or blue. And Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen will be purple. Now, I'm just generalizing for the most part, so it's always best to conduct a quick search on the model you're looking at just to ensure the correct antifreeze color is in that vehicle. Because vehicles such as Ford, even though I'm generalizing and saying it might be yellow, over the course of the last 20 years, they've actually used 3 different colors of antifreeze. So now let's move to the transmission and if your vehicle has a visible dipstick. Now this is a manual transmission, so it doesn't have one, but let's look at another vehicle that would. So what you're looking for is the condition of the transmission fluid based on its color. The first thing you're going to make sure is that it's actually the appropriate level, which it is in this case. And the color of the transmission fluid should be reddish in color, which it is in this case as well. Now, if your transmission fluid is not red in color and it's actually dark, go ahead and give it a sniff test and see if it actually smells burnt or really bad. If that's the case, that means that something's actually failing inside your transmission, and that would be a cause for alarm. So now we're going to go ahead and check the other fluids, which are primarily the power steering and brake. And if you also have access to the clutch fluid as well in a manual transmission, you're going to want to check that with these basic principles. So for each one of those fluids, you're going to want to start off by making sure the levels are correct. Then you're also going to want to check the inside of the cap and make sure that they're all nice and clean inside and debris free, and also inside the containers as well. No debris whatsoever. Next is a visual inspection of the battery, and what you're looking for are the posts to be corrosion free. So you want to look at both of them and make sure there's no buildup whatsoever, because that buildup will eventually start to tell you that the battery is starting to fail, or you'll start to experience starting issues. So in this particular case, no corrosion, we're good to go. So now let's inspect the drive belt, and what you're going to want to do with your flashlight is just make sure you're not seeing any visible cracks or tears or anything that's kind of fraying or coming apart in the drive belt. Now, depending on the vehicle, this might be a little bit tricky to see, so that's why you really want to get in there and look at the outside and inside as well of the drive belts. So depending on how many kilometers are actually on the vehicle, you're going to want to ask the owner about the timing belt and if that was maintained at the recommended schedule, because you don't want a timing belt that is long past its life expectancy, because if that was to break, that would be a major mechanical failure. So just make sure that the belt was serviced at the proper recommended maintenance schedule. The next thing that you're going to want to check for are the hoses. Now, it might be impossible to go through each and every one, but the ones that are very visible to you, what you're looking for are any sort of cracks or deteriorating hoses. So another area to investigate under the engine bay is actually under the hood itself. And what you're looking for are any oils, discoloration, residue that may indicate that something from the engine bay was spraying upwards. So just make sure you give that a good once over and there's no stains whatsoever. And another area that you're going to want to investigate is under the body itself. So oil or leaks could either be trapped on the chassis, so you're going to want to look at that just to make sure it's all dry. And where the vehicle is parked, just make sure there's nothing leaking on the ground. And if there is, just ask what it is. And a neat little trick is to place your phone on the selfie stick, and that'll allow you to reach really far under the vehicle. Some of the other things that you'll want to take note of besides the oil leaks are a suspension system, any sort of damage to the undercarriage of the vehicle, and any rust spots that may need some attention. And now let's move to the tires. So the first thing you're going to want to note are where these wear indicators are on the inside of each one of these treads. And if your tire is already level with that wear indicator, they're going to have to be replaced. Next, you're going to want to look for even wear on the inside and outside of the tire. Now, if your tires are feathered in either direction or either side, that could indicate an alignment issue. Next, you're going to want to rub your hands on both sides of the tire, and what you're looking for or feeling for are bumps. Now, if you feel any sort of bumps whatsoever, that could indicate that the tire is starting to fail or that you have suspension issues. Also, if your hand gets caught on every edge versus running smooth like it is right now, then that could indicate that there's a problem with your struts or shocks, because the excessive bouncing will cause damage to this outer edge. So now that we've checked out fluids, tires, and suspension, let's move to starting the vehicle. So the first thing that you want to do is just turn the ignition in the on position. And then you're going to want to check all the lights and make sure all the notifications are there, like the check engine, the oil, the ABS, the airbags, and also upon startup that they all disappear. Everything looks good. And the reason it's really important to have a cold start is you want to take note of any sort of abnormal noise like knocking or ticking. Next, you're going to want to rev the engine slightly to ensure it sounds normal with no obvious ticking or knocking. So now with your foot on the brake, since this is a manual transmission, you're just going to want to go through the gears just to make sure it shifts nicely. And for an automatic transmission, you want to go up and down the gears and just make sure that it shifts nicely and there's no major jolt whatsoever. And in this particular case, I'm not feeling anything. It feels really good, so no issues with the transmission shifting or with possible motor mounts. Now with the vehicle running, you're going to want to take a look at the exhaust and pay attention to the smoke and the color of the smoke, because that's going to tell you a lot about what's happening with that engine. Now first off, we're not talking about steam, because that would be normal. Now if you see a thick white cloudy smoke once the engine is warm, that would indicate that the coolant is getting into the combustion chamber. Bluish colored smoke would indicate that oil is getting into the combustion chamber. And gray and black smoke is either a rich air fuel mixture or incomplete combustion. In many cases, that could be either a clogged air filter or bad spark plugs. Either way, it's still an incomplete combustion, so further investigation might be needed. The bottom line is you don't want to see any colored smoke coming out your exhaust system besides steam. Now a handy little trick is with your glove is to wipe the bumper just slightly above the exhaust pipe, and what you're looking for is any sort of oily residue, not dirt that might be on here, but any sort of oily residue, because if the engine was actually burning oil, the turbulence itself would actually force that oil onto the bumper. Now if the bumper or the vehicle was just washed before you got there, make sure you actually wipe the back of the bumper after your lengthy test drive, just to make sure that the oily residue isn't apparent or there. So the next thing that we want to do is check out the body before we head on out for a test drive. And besides the obvious rust spots that you can visibly see, a couple areas that you want to check out are just inside the fenders themselves and also inside the door and underneath. And you want to eliminate signs that would indicate that the vehicle might have been in any sort of major collision. So starting with the front of the vehicle, let's look at the seams and make sure that those gaps are even on both sides. You also want to check the headlight and make sure that those gaps are also exactly the same on both sides of the vehicle. And with the wheels straight, you want to take a look over the fender and make sure that they disappear at exactly the same place on both sides. And with the tires, you want to make sure that the gap is even on both sides. Next, you want to make sure that you use the body lines and angles of the vehicle to make sure that all the panels actually line up. And you want to make sure that you're on an angle of the vehicle so you can actually see it properly. Next, you want to take note of the color of each one of the major panels, because just in case a door or a fender was replaced due to an accident, it might be very difficult to actually match the proper hue, and that could be a tell that something actually happened to the vehicle. And make sure you check the windshield for any cracks or rock chips that could spider under any stress. And make sure you also check out the headlights and taillights and look for moisture buildup on the inside, because that could actually indicate that there's a crack or leak. And under the hood, look at all the main supports. And especially under the front lip, because if there was an accident that someone was trying to hide, this would be an area that would be incredibly difficult to make it look like it came out of the factory. The other thing you want to take a look at are all the factory welds and make sure that they look the same on both sides of the front end of the car. And a lot of the bolts that you'll see on the front end are also painted as well. So you just want to inspect those and make sure that they're not scratched. If they are due to its socket, it will allow you to ask some key questions. And also in the trunk area, you just want to make sure that all the wells are factory. And another area to inspect is the spare tire well. Now, first of all, this gives you an opportunity to look at the spare tire, but you also want to make sure that all the factory wells are exactly the same and nothing looks out of place. And in some cases, some of the panels will actually have VIN numbers on them, depending on the make and model of the vehicle. Unfortunately, this one here doesn't have any of the VIN numbers stamped on either of the panels. But in case you do see it on the one that you're looking at, just make sure it matches the original VIN number of the vehicle. So the funniest thing happened while recording this video. The weather turned, and look at all that snow. Now, this can easily happen to you while inspecting your vehicle, so you just have to be prepared for anything. And it's okay to come back and check out a vehicle a couple of times. In fact, it's probably best if the opportunity is there. This video was primarily about the inspection of the vehicle, but let's touch on a couple of the key factors of the test drive. So with a cold engine, you want to make sure you accelerate slowly and make sure you feel every upshift and downshift as you accelerate and slow down, because going too fast may actually mask any issues. So during the test drive, you want to make sure that all the gauges, dials, and buttons, everything works, which would be far too many to list in this video. So even if it's mechanical or digital, just make sure everything works unless you were told otherwise. And items such as the radio and fan, try to test them while you're in the park position. That way you don't have that sound while you're driving, and you can actually focus on any of the mechanical sounds coming from either under the vehicle or the engine bay. And go for the longest drive allowed with a combination of city and highway. That way you get a chance to put the vehicle through real conditions and see if everything operates as it should. And when you get back, make sure you pop open the hood and look for any leaks that may not have been visible prior to your test drive. Now, the engine will be hot, so be really careful as you maneuver around. And when the engine cools down, just go ahead and check all the fluid levels once again, just in case they were topped up just before your test drive. In addition, check the reviews online to help with your decision making, and you can always call the local parts store to gauge what kind of parts are being ordered for that particular make and model. And regardless of the mileage that you see, always ask for the service records so you can see what kind of work was done and where it was completed. And if you happen to have a scanner or an OBD2 plug, go ahead and plug it in, which will be right under the dash here. And what you're looking for are any codes that need to be addressed. Now, this isn't necessary at this point, but it certainly is a nice to have, because in all likeliness, when you actually take the vehicle for a mechanical inspection by a trained technician, just make sure that that is part of the check process. But checking for engine codes is a definite must when you narrow down your search. So as a reminder, it's always best to go with another person to check out the vehicle, because they'll actually help you with your buying decision. And if that person or yourself is more mechanical, then even better. So in this video, we covered off all the major components and checklist of items to look for, along with questions or concerns, just to dig a little bit deeper to help you look for that perfect vehicle. And I would always stress that you need to take the vehicle to a certified technician once you've narrowed down your search. And now you can tackle your used car checklist with confidence. Hopefully you found this video beneficial. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Of course, share it with a friend and hit that subscribe button. And tune in next time to Your Home Garage.